is here for you.
Hi, my dear family. It is AstroViktor, your personal astrologer. I have been doing astrology for over 20 years and I just love it. I have been doing it full time. I'm a teacher, an author, and I also do private consultations as well. If you would like to be part of my family, then hit the subscribe button right now because there are going to be very exciting videos coming up for you anyway. May is about Saturn, Saturn in the sign of Aries. So I have invited a bunch of astrologers to talk to you about this phenomenon, which obviously happens every 30 years. And one of the reasons why I love doing these interviews is because you will kind of like throw ideas at each other and then it will trigger something else in your mind. So I think it's going to be fantastic, kind of like 10 videos that I'm going to be giving you. And today is the very first one. And that's going to be with Frank Clifford. But also, I'm going to have Kira Sutherland, Astro Sweaty, B. Britt, Susie Wu on the channel, and few secret presenters also. So subscribe now not to miss any of these videos. And also, if you would like to learn more about Saturn, I have got a course starting on the 4th of May. It will be 20 weeks, and it is really all you need to know about Saturn. It's super detailed information. That's the only course you ever will need on Saturn. And if you want to improve your life, if you want to go on the path of success, fulfillment, you want to be kind of like jumping right onto this course because this is going to be super detailed. So I hope to see you there. And also, I have a retreat in June in New York where we will look at the remedies of the planets from a psychological as well as a practical point of view. So I hope to see you there too. More details available on my website, AstroViktor.com. But now let's get started with the interviews. So today we have got a special guest. We are going to be talking about Saturn in Aries. So welcome, Frank. Frank Clifford visited my channel before a few times. And I invited him to talk to us about how Saturn affects the sign of Aries. Obviously, the shift is going to be happening very soon. So we're going to have a lot of guests talking about Saturn in Aries. How are you, Frank?
I'm good, thank you, Victor. Yes, and being in Aries, I do like being the first on your list. I know you probably got another Aries or two lined up, but we do like being the first, yeah.
Oh, yes. How is the London School of Astrology? Any project now?
Busy, yes, thank you. Always great. I love teaching. It's a great community. Some students never want to leave, which is lovely, and they come back and they redo the courses or they stay. And as I was saying to you before we began, I've just bought the Mountain Astrologer magazine, so that's my new Aries project for Saturn in Aries for the next few years. So hopefully I'll be able to explain a bit of the commitment of the Saturn in Aries transit for everybody. But for me, it's going to be the magazine.
Any new books? Not?
I've got a few. I've always got a book or two waiting to be finished, you know. That's just me. I do have a horror book that I'm working on with Richard Swatton, and that should be out in the summertime. So maybe 3 or 4 months from now. I just need to sit down and finish it.
Oh,
A good lesson for
exciting.
Aries. A good lesson for Aries, definitely. Yeah.
This Aries might not be the greatest when it comes to, I call them a little bit lousy finishers, but hopefully this Saturn will help, right, to get it done.
I hope so. I mean, I have Saturn on my ascendant in my chart, in natal chart anyway, so I tend to be a different type of Aries. Aries has the reputation of being very good at starting things. And I think for my clients and my students, I'm very good at injecting energy and saying to them, go for it, try it out, give it a go, you know? And then that's all Aries has to do sometimes. But for themselves, they have to learn how to finish.
Do you find yourself procrastinating? Because Saturn does trine my rising sign to the degree, and I do procrastinate, but in the finish line, I just get
Ah,
very quickly. So I finish usually the deadline by the deadline, but I do it in the last minute.
it helps to have a deadline, yes. And I don't like last minute, but it depends on what it is. It's amazing how much you can get done when you're trying to put off the main thing you should get done. So you can really finish other things when you're trying to avoid your main priority.
Okay, so shall we be worried about Saturn in Aries? Obviously, traditionally it's in fall, and Saturn is the taskmaster and the malefic and all these lovely keywords to it. So how do you see, what's your viewpoint on Saturn in Aries?
Well, you may remember I'm not a fan of things like debility and fall, because I think every placement can be expressed in uplifting ways, helpful ways, and it can be expressed in negative or sabotaging ways as well. So for me, I look at the combination, and Saturn and Aries don't seem on the surface to have a lot in common because Aries wants things now, and Saturn teaches us that we have to wait, we have to work hard. Aries rushes in and says, "Hey, I've been on the job about 2.5 hours. Can I be the boss?" It wants to be able to move up quickly. And Saturn says, put the brakes on, hold off, and have some patience. So they're very different energies. They do have some things in common, which I'll talk about in a minute. But the one thing I think to remember about the transit of Saturn in Aries, and it starts on the 25th of May of this year, and it goes all the way up to September the 1st, and then pops back into Pisces. And then it's not until Valentine's Day next year, the 14th of February, 2026, that it moves into Aries for the duration. And it's just about an extra 2 years. So it's from February 2026 to April 2028. But it pops in this summer between May and September, giving us a clue of what we might need to be doing in those 2 years later as well. And the key is that it's a new cycle. Any planet that moves into Aries is beginning the zodiac, as you know. So there's a sense of a cycle having been completed. The last 29 years, as Saturn moved through all the signs. And even though it may not be the beginning of your chart or the beginning of where your Saturn is, you may not be having a Saturn return, there is still something about the cycle beginning and learning that every as Saturn moves through every sign, there are general lessons for the world to understand and to learn. Saturn being in Pisces for the last couple of years, part of what we need to do is to let go of Pisces stuff. Perhaps certain beliefs that may be negative. Pisces has been about, Saturn in Pisces has been about being more inclusive, trying to welcome the world in many ways, try to be more compassionate, perhaps, learning that lesson. Now it steps into Aries, it begins the whole cycle again. And Saturn always asks us, what is valid? What's logical? What is going to work for us? What's sustainable? What can I work on for the next 2.5 years as it goes through Aries, and also the next 29 years as it goes through the whole of the zodiac once again? So coming back to Aries, it's back to basics. Aries is quite a simple sign. It has priorities. It knows what it wants in life, usually. And there's a sense of, oh, I've got to take care of myself. And it's pretty good at understanding the number one priority. And for Aries, that really should be itself in reality. Often we put other people and other situations and trying to be liked in our way, but Saturn in Aries is going to be that lesson about putting yourself first in the sense of learning to be happy, and then you can start to be happy with other people around. What's your feeling about that, Victor?
As you said, I started walking away from the idea of fall and detriment and all these type of things. One of the reasons why, especially with Saturn in the sign of Aries, is because Aries is ruled by Mars, but Mars is exalted in Capricorn. So, and then, so I see this. between Saturn and Mars connections that it's all about commitment and having a goal and just going after it and then rolling up the sleeves and get things done. And I think that's going to be a major focal point coming with Saturn in the sign of Aries, that we cannot just postpone things anymore. We're gonna have to get the job done. If we promise something, because obviously Saturn is still having the conjunction to North Node, and that's a good 10-year cycle as well. There is a lot of promise going on in the world, but there is no delivery behind, or just kind of like a half job done. And I think this is going to get questioned with Saturn in the sign of Aries. Why did you promise something? Why is it not delivered?
I agree. I think the key is going to be commitment. Now, Saturn is all about long-term commitment, and Aries is about short-term. So, how do you put the two together? And what I thought was often life is made of short-term commitments. When we start to think, for example, in a relationship or in a job, my goodness, gulp. If I'm only 20, I'm going to be with this person for the rest of my life, or I'm going to be in this job for the rest of my life. And then we start to get restless, we get anxious, we get worried about that. We want to break free. And life is really about forgetting the long-term picture, because that will take care of itself in a way. It's more about saying the next year, the next 2.5 years, how can I put my energy, my motivation into this project, into this relationship, into this job? How can I do that? And if I can do that for 2.5 years, maybe things will change, maybe they won't, but I'm on my way to creating a life instead of uh, being too concerned about the rest of my life. And I think that perhaps the lesson of Saturn in Aries, where do we invest our efforts and energy for the next couple of years and see where that takes us? We don't have to have a massive long-term commitment. For the magazine, for instance, my goal is 3 years. As Saturn moves through Aries, okay, I'll see how it goes. If I thought about running a magazine until I'm 80 or 90 years old, I'd probably book myself into an institution for the insane, the idea of wanting to do that for so many years. So it's short-term efforts and little victories, achievements, goals being met, as you say, finishing things, getting things done. And then that will turn into a long-term commitment should you want it. The bottom line, I think, with Aries is about courage. And Saturn in Aries is the test of courage. How courageous are you going to be to go after the things that you want in your life, the things that are important, the number one priorities? Yeah. How do you turn what we've been dreaming about in Pisces and put it into form with Aries? Like, we've planted the seed in the winter and now the seed is going to grow. Where do we take it? How do we feed it? How do we nurture it? Yeah. And as we know with Saturn, wherever there's Saturn, there are life lessons, hard lessons to learn. But that doesn't mean that they have to be ignored. We don't have to run away from things. I think sometimes Saturn in Pisces has been about running away from certain commitments or finding excuses, finding reasons why things shouldn't be, why we shouldn't be to blame or to be responsible for things. And the responsibility now lies with the individual, Saturn in Aries. So we know that if you don't direct your energy and you don't have a goal, even if it's just for a week or a month, we have anger, depression, blocked energy. We have all sorts of ways that the body and the mind react to situations when we block them. So Saturn can be about blocks and testing times. But if we do the Aries and we say, okay, I'm going to lose some weight or I'm going to do some exercise in the coming month, rather than thinking I need to be 10 kilos by the end of the year, or in 2 years from now, we do it bit by bit in short spurts. we can start to tackle the energy that Saturn in Aries, I think, is inviting us to embrace, to be involved in.
You know, with Saturn being a social planet and in a highly individualistic sign, I think this is the burden of the society on the individual as well. So, what I mean by that is that the expectations towards, a child, because Aries is a toddler energy. So, I think it's just growing, and then we basically suck the life out of those little creatures. We don't let them have fun anymore. And I also see this as a problem, and I think this is potentially where either the youth will pretty much stand up or they're gonna kind of fight back. The innocence.
Yeah. I
And
think we just had a law in England just a few days ago, as Saturn leaves Pisces, about transgender rights and or definition of women. And again, this is things change when people get angry. Things change when people get frustrated. And a lot of people just sit back and let things happen, and other people are inspired to make changes. So it doesn't really matter what side of the fence you're on in any social or political idea. It doesn't really matter. It's the idea of Saturn in Aries says the responsibility, Saturn, is now down to you, Aries. Yeah. So you've got to mature, you've got to grow up. Aries is famously the baby of the zodiac. It's the first sign, the newborn. And Saturn says, yeah, but you can't be a newborn or a baby when you're 40, when you're 50. And so its movement into Aries says, grow up. Yeah. If you want to be independent, if you want your own life, you're going to take responsibility and you have to own up to things. Yeah. We've also got the idea of Aries being about youth and Saturn being about old age and maturity and what we might say, the establishment. So this these two, this planet and this sign, these two symbols in astrology are very challenging because, in a way, it is about youth, Aries, struggling with the elder or trying to overthrow the elder. And I think that's going to be an interesting battle in the coming 2.5 years. Younger people coming up wanting to take on roles of leadership instead of the old dinosaurs that we have in power. So that may be part of it. The younger people, the what you might call the upstarts, the people who are pushy and ambitious, coming up into positions that have always been traditionally with much older people. That might be part of it too.
did you hear that in China they rolled out the AI lessons? So basically, it is in primary schools now, secondary schools. So even though that doesn't have a Saturn in Aries feelings to it, but Saturn
What
has
have they done? I didn't get that. What have they done in China?
AI
Yes.
lessons. They started teaching AI at schools.
Okay. Well, that feels very Pluto and Aquarius, doesn't it, as well, with that?
However,
Interesting.
Saturn and Pluto are in sextile. So
Yeah.
I can imagine with Saturn hitting the world axis that this is going to get rolled out in the entire world.
Well, Saturn is all about teaching and learning and education on it in itself, isn't it? It's about that schooling, about having to go to school and those commitments. So it's not. I'm not surprised that AI is now the thing you need to learn, and I wouldn't be surprised that 5 years from now we're just being taught by AI instead of teachers, where you can just ask the teacher in front of you, this machine or your laptop, all the answers to what you need. Maybe they'll just push teachers to one side and we'll all be taught by AI as well as learning how to do it. Yeah.
The reason why it came to my mind was because obviously you mentioned the dinosaurs and so forth. And I can imagine with Saturn in Aries, though, that there is going to be a pushback. The older generation doesn't want AI to take over our lives. But I also believe with Saturn and North Node conjunction, there is no growth because That conjunction is fascinating. I mean, Mercury and Venus went direct on the degree of Saturn North Node conjunction. Um, so it really feels to me that there is no growth without kind of like moving forward and letting go of old idealism.
Yeah.
We are on the verge of having to start fresh. And if it's AI, we're gonna have to go for it. I think if we don't, some of us will so-called die. So it brings us the death as Saturn, the traditional ruler of death.
Yeah.
Basically, we are going to be out of jobs.
Well, we know that if you don't stay in touch with things, you lose touch, and progress always progresses. It always continues. So it's going to be it's easy to become a dinosaur in this age ourselves, even if we're younger, even if we're clued up, clued in, the idea that we need to stay aware of things. Um, Saturn in Pisces and Neptune in Pisces, which of course they're both moving into Aries this summer. Neptune has already moved into Aries. The the era of the victim, I think, is closing, is ending. Yeah, we're and I mean that with respect to people, because people do suffer. There are people with illnesses, of course, and many, many different trials and problems and um, illnesses, all sorts of things. But we seem to be a society, and maybe different societies all around the world, where it's easier to blame and shame other people than to take responsibility for what's going on in your life. So whether it's writing a nasty comment on social media because you're angry with your life, but you're taking it out on somebody else, or whether it's using all sorts of excuses for why things haven't happened for you in your life. This is where Pisces moves into Aries. That shift from it's everybody else's fault and poor me to moving forward and saying the responsibility rests on my shoulders. Yeah. And I think that's the key, I think, of the shift in that way. And that is the key to maturity, isn't it? Not sitting around blaming our parents for everything, blaming social media, blaming the government, blaming the president, whatever it may be. What can we do for ourselves to make the world and the people around us better and make life better for everybody? And it starts off with making those decisions for ourselves, I think.
I love the idea that Saturn would represent family legacy. And I think in the sign of Aries, it could really talk to us about having to break out of our upbringing and kind of like outgrowing the limited belief systems. I loved when you were talking about the scripts that we create in our heads. And I think psychologically, this Saturn in Aries could talk to us about having to cut the scripts of the family legacy out of our brains.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that helps to some extent. I mean, it's important not to forget the past, because if you forget the past, as they say, you tend to repeat it. If you ignore it, if you forget it, you just keep saying and doing the same thing. But the idea that somebody else is to blame for where you are now and where you want to be, or they're blocking you, this is what we need to address. And of course, people do have very bad situations, of course, but maybe the Saturn in Aries is about saying, I'm not going to take that anymore. The responsibility lies with myself. And we need to stretch ourselves. We need to challenge ourselves. And this is why the fire signs, particularly Aries and Leo, are linked to the idea of courage. Before you can really make progress in your life, I think you need to have courage. Where do you get that? I'm not quite sure. It comes from perhaps no longer wanting to please people, maybe no longer wanting to live somebody else's idea of life, your parents' idea, your partner's idea of what your life should be like. But in there, there's courage in all of us to make a change. And Aries knows you make the change now, you don't make it 2 years from now. You do it now. And it's the power of now, isn't it? That's the key. The other thing I would say to anybody looking at Saturn in Aries is to go back to the mid to late 90s, 1990s. So Saturn was in Aries from about springtime, April 1996. Of course, it went back and forth as it does sometimes. It wasn't really until the beginning of March 1999 that it left Aries. That's the last time. So April 96 to March 99. Those 3 years, minus a few months in between. That was the last time Saturn was in Aries. So I would say to everyone watching, if you were alive then, and if you remember that period of your life, what were you doing? What did you implement then? What needed courage? What needed a level of independence, initiative, all those Aries qualities that we all need a little bit of. We all need a bit of Mars, a bit of Aries energy. So I would say to them, go back then to have a look. That's a good 29 years ago when it first moved in. But it will be a period in people's lives they might remember that could have been challenging, of course, but what were they doing for themselves? How were they trying to improve themselves? That may be part of the question.
What about, Aries being entitlement, the sign of war and fight? So is it unavoidable with Saturn? Is it a compulsory literature that we have to be in a war zone, or how do you see that? I'm sure people are curious about it.
Well, Aries is the sign of war, and we know that Libra and Venus are also connected to war because we do tend to fight over the things that we value. So you often see Libra and Venus connected to war, but of course, traditionally Mars, Aries, and Scorpio are linked to war. Um, it doesn't seem possible. But you think about Saturn in Aries, it could be government restrictions, Saturn, on guns, on war, violence, fighting, all the things that are represented by the crudest form of Aries. Yeah. So I don't imagine America is going that way, for example, because America has those controversial gun laws, etc. But it may be other parts of the world that are starting to clamp down on guns, on aggressive behavior. There may be new rules and regulations, government laws that are going to be about that. I do think that um, I had a client. I don't know, maybe 3 years ago, who asked me how long the war in Ukraine was going to be, and he seemed to think it was going to be over soon. And I said, these things take a lot longer. We hope that there will be peace in that area of the world, in the Middle East, etc. But maybe Saturn in Aries uh, is more problematic in the sense that rules and regulations against individual rights may be what comes out. So instead of freedoms, it may be more about uh, disciplinary measures on individuals in different countries. So it doesn't look particularly hopeful for that. Uh, but on another level, when you look at the times when Saturn was in Aries, there's often a lot of talk about head injuries, uh, violence, death, aggressive leaders. America has a very aggressive leader at the moment with Mars on the ascendant in his natal chart. Um, what I did notice when I was doing some research is that when Saturn finally moves out of Aries, and that will be in April 2028, often that period of time before it steps into Taurus, it feels like there's going to be some sort of stalemate or peace agreement over land, over because Taurus is about land, of course, and all those things. So it feels like going from Aries to Taurus, there's going to be a settlement, a settling down, and that's what we can hope for. But that's not for another 3 years from now. So I'm hoping things will calm down before then and find a peaceful solution to things. But it may be the move from Aries to Taurus in 3 years that sees that.
With Saturn, which is also the representation of lack. of something. So I can actually imagine lack of guns, as in the production of those, or the lack of tools, for example, for real estate or construction work. Just because Saturn will be in square to Jupiter as well.
Yes.
And Jupiter in Cancer can really talk to us about the real estate. But also Saturn as in the planet of production, I can imagine new ways of, like those guns and so forth, like how we produce them, because Saturn will be in sextile to Uranus as well in Gemini.
Yeah. As always, you always have to look, as you're doing, at everything else. Saturn doesn't act independently. Pluto's in Aquarius, Neptune moves into Aries. We've got all sorts of things. What we do know is that the middle of the year, June and July, we've got the Jupiter, Saturn, Neptune connections. And that's always going to be interesting to look at when three planets come together. The last time there was really that sort of activity was at the beginning of COVID with Jupiter, Saturn, and Pluto all within orb of each other. I'm not predicting another COVID, but the middle of the year is going to be interesting because financially, I think we're in for a rough ride. I think as Uranus gets to the end of Taurus in the next year, it moves into Gemini, of course, but then it goes back into Taurus. But the next year, really, we're going to have peaks, or I should say lows financially. I think there are going to be some pretty chaotic times in the stock markets and the value of land and property, and then it should improve. But it's we're looking at some pretty uh, tempestuous or unpredictable times financially as well, and they seem to start around June, July, I think.
One of the first things that you pick to talk about is the individuality, and I think that's going to be a main theme, surely, just by having the dispositor Mars in Leo. So what does it mean to be a human, basically? But I looked at the Ingress chart, and Mars will be on 17 degree of Leo. However, it will make a nice trine to Venus, though, in the sign of Aries as well. So you mentioned the peace talk, and I'm really hoping that maybe we're going to see something with Venus and Mars trines, at least initiations.
Yes, we can always hope for the better side of human nature winning out. um, I remember years ago, I've been in astrology 35 years now, and I remember people talking about Neptune moving into Pisces and how it was going to be a more spiritual age for people. And I must have been cynical all the way back then, because Neptune has been 13, 14 years in Pisces now, and it's just moved into Aries. So I thought, well, yes, there's the opportunity to be spiritual, but what's the other side of Pisces? So every time we see an ingress like Saturn into Aries or Uranus into Gemini, there's always going to be the good and the bad. And we just hope that individually we choose the positive side of that instead of falling into the traps of the negative, I think.
This Neptune story is really interesting because it always starts nice and then it ends nasty. So, with Neptune, for example, now I think it was it in Sagittarius when it started with the Disneyland and then it ended with the massacre, the witch hunt and all those type of things. So unfortunately, I describe Neptune as the rotten apple. It's like the apple, it looks beautiful, and then when you bite into it, it's just rotten inside, and then a huge disappointment.
Um,
So I'm not that optimistic as well with Saturn and Neptune moving into the sign of Aries, to be frank, because it might be about the unification of nations and yeah, let be people, uh, be whoever they want to be. But yes, I think not that always nice, not that nice. Yeah.
um,
So lastly, what do you think the karmic learnings of Aries are?
the what, sorry?
The karmic learnings.
of
What do we have to
of
learn?
Aries. Yeah. Um, I think we live in times where we expect everything immediately, and Saturn in Aries, the karmic lesson will be you're going to have to put the energy, the sweat into it. Yeah. So maybe that's the idea that something breaks, we replace it. We no longer work to fix it. We just throw it out, or just stick it in a drawer. So maybe it's something about that. Saturn in Aries is saying, commit to the here and now. That's going to be super important. Not be worrying about the past or the future too much. Aries is very much in the now, but also realizing that true mastery, Saturn, takes time, but it starts with courage. So I would say the karmic lesson really of Saturn moving into Aries is ultimately the courage to be yourself, to do what you do, to not make excuses for that, not to look to blame other people for this and that, but to be in the moment and living fully every hour that you're awake. That may be the big lesson that we're being invited to explore this time. And that's a challenge because we get into the habit of, oh well, I can't do this because of him or her or them, and the reality is change starts with us. So that Aries is the great reminder that it comes from you and the courage comes from you to make change in your life. So I think that's probably the big karmic message.
I do not remember. Do you use traditional rulers or modern rulership?
It depends on what they're for. If I look at the houses, I tend to look at traditional rulers, and I think of the outer planets as more sort of generational connections or connections to our particular group, our society. So yeah, I tend to look at the traditional rulerships.
Because what has helped me with Saturn is the part of planning. So when Saturn is, let's say, because currently it's in my first house, I'm already planning out second house themes because Saturn being the ruler of Aquarius, which represents future, but the future needs planning, as you said. And it's not just about short-term goals, but long-term goals as well. So what I do is that I've already opened a saving account and then I'm putting some money in there, not because I'm afraid of running out of money. I just want to honor Saturn so that it doesn't bite me in the butts, basically. Or I started looking at how much certain things costs and not just going to the shop and then picking the first item off of the shelf because that's just reckless. And Aries does that. So that's how I'm planning it out for my second house. I just wanted to give a tip to everyone because Saturn is the planet of planning, and you cannot with Aries, you cannot just start, I don't know, on the 24th of May and then thinking that it's going to work out. The work has to be done before.
Yeah, and you have 2.5 years to do it as well. So that sense of commitment, and as I said earlier, not for 20 years, but for 2.5 years, or a commitment for 3 months for now, and then see where it takes you. I think people get put off commitments that they start to think about the long, long term. And Aries is good about thinking about the next few weeks, the next few months, rather than the next 30 years.
The
Yeah.
reason why I start earlier is because Saturn is also the planet of reward. So I tend to believe that if we start one house before the preparation work, then by the time it gets to the Aries cusp, for example, which is going to be my second house, then the rewards start coming in rather than the lessons.
I agree. I agree. I'm always saying to students and clients, look at your transits a good year ahead and start honoring them, start preparing because yeah, yeah, as you say, it's important to invest and accept invitations early. And then when it finally arrives, you can reap the rewards, you can understand what it's about, make changes if you need to. But it's better to do that than to be surprised by unexpected or difficult problems. Yeah.
When Saturn went into my 12th house, that's when I decided to lose weight. So by the time Saturn finished in my 12th house, I did lose 100 and God knows 20 kilos.
Wow.
So when Saturn went into my first house, because I was really afraid that he was going to kick my butt. So I wanted to do that during the 12th house energies. And then in the first house, I just built the body, like muscles and so on. I've got Mars in the first house. So yeah, I think it's a really good tip with Saturn in the sign of like planning things out. Anyway, I don't want to keep you on too long. Thank you very much for joining me today. It's
Oh, you're welcome. As you say, the important thing is that Saturn isn't your enemy, even if people write about it in negative ways sometimes. It is something, it's a bit like, gaining experience. You have to have trials and difficulties to have that experience, and then you try to pass it on to other people. It's a bit like a parent trying to warn the child about their boyfriend, "Oh, don't go out with him, he's trouble." But we have to learn our own way. And Saturn is the invitation to do it our way and to learn from experience. And that takes time. So we all have to do that. Yeah.
Actually, I remember in one of your books, you said about Aries, or it was maybe a lecture of yours, a birthright of Aries is to punch people in the face. And then when we tell them not to do that, we take away their birthright. Obviously, I'm not saying a child should be punching people in the face, but an Aries has got the right to be angry, has got the right to be fast. So why are we telling them to slow down? And Saturn will say now to Aries to slow down a little bit.
Yeah. But I think there's a compromise. As I said, you can do a short-term commitment, but you got to do a commitment. But you don't have to do 29 years. You can do 2.5 or whatever. So there's a compromise. And that's why Saturn's moving through Aries. When it gets to Taurus, there's a different energy, there's a different lesson, there's a different invitation. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much. Have a lovely week. Good luck with the magazine. I hope it's going to be a fantastic one. When is the first
Well,
coming
it
out?
comes out in June. It's free to everyone. They can sign up on the website or come to the LSA. The first issue is free. We've got some amazing people writing already for it. And then we'll see how it goes over the next 2.5, 3 years. Yeah.
Great. Good luck with it.
Thank you. Thank you very
Thank
much,
you very much.
Victor.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Every sign and every house, a journey starts and we allow the universe so vast and true. Astro Viktor, it's here for you.